leaders that we're working with to create succession plans are usually the biggest leaders, the busiest leaders, and the leaders that are pulled in multiple directions. So that alone already adds to the uphill battle that we have. So one of the things that I encourage you to do is to be sensitive to the reasons why big leaders are sometimes opposed to or hesitant as it relates to succession planning. Part of those are they're not ready to leave. They've built a legacy. The business is their baby. They really own the process. It's a part of who they are. And so as HR leaders, when we're starting to have that conversation of succession planning, what they're hearing is, you want me out. You see me gone. And so being sensitive to that and having that as a part of your conversation and your pitch, if you will also help. Now, it's not a matter of necessarily convincing the leaders that succession planning is necessary. It should be about how this can help them in their day-to-day. So again, working in that as part of the story also helps. As leaders, they're thinking about the business long-term. And when I've coached and mentored HR leaders on being able to attempt to have the succession planning process going, I've recommended that they do so after a leadership offsite, so after the annual planning process. You don't want to give yourself too much time where it becomes a distant memory, but you want to give it a little bit of time for there to be a settling, and then introduce or reintroduce the succession planning conversation. That way the leader is already thinking about strategy, already thinking about the business plan and the future of the business, and then you're tying it in. Many leaders also think about succession planning as immediate. And it's our job to tell the story that it's really 2+ years for most leadership transitions before a successor is identified and the transitions start to occur, because many times it's scaling. So telling that story is also important. Leaders also have a very real concern about skills gaps. So they believe they're the only ones who can sit in that role. They're the only ones with the skills that are necessary to do the job. And so as we're telling the story about the importance of succession planning, we should be talking about the systems that are in place to bridge any gaps. So as we're identifying successors, we do know the individuals aren't ready today, but how are we as HR leaders going to be able to bridge the gap? Now, the business is critical, and during the process of influence and succession planning, it's important that we talk about ROI. So what's the return on investment? And I know we're very good at that, because in HR, we don't always have the most budget, and we're considered a cost center. So we already have that muscle as it relates to talking about the return on the investment. Succession planning is no different. It's a large investment for the organization. We're talking about senior leaders within the organization transitioning, and we're talking about putting in place a plan to ensure that these individuals are replaced and replaced with the best talent. And so in doing so, we want to make sure that we're preparing for them the very best plan to get them ready for the most senior role. So while we're doing that, we know it comes with a cost. So talking through the return on the investment, why it's important for business continuity to ensure that the plan is in place and to make that investment, that should be a part of our talk as well. Now, performance management is one of the biggest levers that we can access as HR leaders. Your performance management plan should be one that has data that talks through why the leaders on the succession plan are the best leaders. So it should be very clear to show the data on present performance, past performance, as well as the future potential of the individual. So you want to make sure that you have an amount of data gathered, a period of time, for the individuals that are considered. And I'm tricky with that. I normally bring a pool to the leaders. I know the one that bubbles to the top. The data is very clear. But it's very good for the leaders to sit there and look at the information and get to the answer that I know they should get to. And it's very interesting when they get to a different answer sometimes, and we can talk through bias and all the other things. But having a performance management process that makes it very clear, and having the data that speaks to why the successor is the right one makes our job so much easier.